The morning of my father's funeral began before the sun came up. I hadn't slept anyway. Grief doesn't respect schedules. It comes in waves, pulling you under just as you think you've found air. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to my husband breathe beside me, steady and unaware, and wondered how the world could keep functioning when mine had stopped. My father was gone. That sentence still didn't sound real. It felt like something borrowed from someone else's life. My father, who called every Sunday. My father, who fixed things without asking. My father, who once stayed up all night with me when I was sick, just so I wouldn't be afraid. Gone. I got up quietly, showered, dressed in black that felt too light for the weight I was carrying. In the mirror, my face looked unfamiliar, hollowed, older. I touched my cheek like I didn't recognize the woman staring back. My husband knocked softly on the bathroom door. "Are you ready?" I nodded, even though I wasn't. I don't think I ever would be. The drive to the funeral home was silent, the kind of silence that presses in on your ears until it feels loud. He kept his eyes on the road. I watched the trees blur past and thought about how my father used to point out birds on long drives, how he made even ordinary moments feel worth remembering. We parked. I took a breath that felt like it scraped my lungs on the way in. Inside, the air smelled like flowers and polished wood. People I hadn't seen in years hugged me, their arms warm, their voices low and careful. "He was a good man. He loved you so much. I'm so sorry." Each sentence landed and stayed. My husband stood a step behind me, hand resting lightly on my back. It felt performative, like he knew where to place it, but not why. The service hadn't started yet when he leaned down and whispered, "I need to talk to you." "Not now," I thought. "Please, not now." "After," I whispered back. He nodded, but his jaw tightened. I noticed it then, the tension, the distance that had been growing quietly for months. I'd chalked it up to stress, to grief, to life happening faster than either of us could keep up. I was wrong. The ceremony began. I sat in the front row, staring at the closed casket, my hands folded in my lap because I didn't trust them not to shake. The pastor spoke about legacy, about love that carries on. I laughed suddenly, softly, under my breath. Ha! Not because it was funny, but because the idea that love always stays felt like a cruel joke in that moment. When it was time to stand, my knees nearly gave out. My husband steadied me. I leaned into him out of habit, muscle memory stronger than trust. Afterward, as people gathered in small clusters, sharing memories, he guided me toward a quiet hallway. I assumed he was being considerate, giving me space. He reached into his jacket pocket. "I didn't want to do this here," he said. My stomach dropped. "But you left me no choice." He handed me a folder, white, crisp, completely out of place among the black clothes and red eyes and trembling hands. I stared at it, confused. "What is this?" He exhaled, like someone bracing for inconvenience. "Divorce papers." The hallway tilted. The sounds around us faded into a dull hum. I laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "Ha! That's not funny." He said, "I'm serious. I've been meaning to tell you." At my father's funeral, I opened the folder with hands that no longer felt like mine. The words blurred: petitioner, respondent, irreconcilable differences. It felt clinical, detached, like paperwork describing a stranger's life. "You couldn't wait," I said quietly. "There's never a good time," he replied. I looked at him then, really looked, at the man I'd married, the man who'd held my hand hours earlier while I cried into a borrowed tissue, the man who had just chosen this moment. "This is cruel," I whispered. He shrugged. I didn't want to drag it out. Something inside me went very still. People passed by the end of the hallway, laughing softly, reminiscing about my father. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. I felt tears spill over, hot and unstoppable. I didn't wipe them away. "My father just died, and you're leaving." He glanced away. "I can't keep pretending." I laughed again, broken this time, the sound tearing its way out of me. "Ha! You chose today to stop pretending?" He said nothing. That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated, and he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. I don't remember walking back into the main room. My body moved, but my mind stayed behind in that hallway with the white folder and the man who had just decided my grief was an inconvenience. Faces blurred together. Voices reached me like I was underwater. Someone touched my arm and asked if I was okay. I nodded because that's what you do when the truth feels too large to say out loud. My mother was sitting near the front, her shoulders hunched, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked so small. I couldn't bring myself to add another weight to her already bowed back, so I swallowed it. Again. My husband stood off to the side, checking his phone like we were waiting for a table at a restaurant. I stared at him, wondering how I had missed this version of him, or maybe I hadn't missed it at all. Maybe I'd just been trained to look away. The reception afterward felt endless. Coffee grew cold in untouched cups, plates of food sat abandoned. People shared stories about my father, his laugh, his kindness, the way he showed up when it mattered. Each story felt like both comfort and accusation. This is what showing up looks like, I thought. At one point, I slipped into the bathroom and locked myself in a stall. I sat there, pressed my forehead against the cool metal divider, and cried into my hands. Quietly at first, then harder. My shoulders shook, my breath hitched. The sound that came out of me didn't feel human. It felt like something breaking open. I laughed suddenly through the tears, a cracked, bitter sound. Of course this would happen now. Of course the ground would give way when I was already on my knees. When I emerged, I splashed water on my face and stared at my reflection. My eyes were red, my skin blotchy. I looked like someone who had been hit by something she never saw coming. In the parking lot, as people began to leave, my husband approached me like we were coworkers finishing an awkward meeting. I'll give you time to process, he said. We can talk logistics later. Logistics. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. The drive home was worse than the drive there. The silence wasn't shared now, it was divided. He dropped me off in front of the house and said he'd stay with a friend for the night. I thought that might be best, he said. Best for whom? Inside, the house smelled like stale coffee and grief. Cards were scattered on the table, sympathy flowers lined the counter. My father's name was written in looping script again and again, proof that he had existed, that he had mattered. I collapsed on the couch and cried until my chest ached. The sound came freely now, uncontained, echoing off the walls. I cried for my father, for the marriage I thought I had, for the cruelty of timing that felt intentional no matter how much I tried to soften it. Sometime later, my phone buzzed, a text from my husband. I didn't mean to hurt you, I just couldn't wait anymore. I stared at the screen, then laughed out loud, a sharp, hollow sound that startled me. As if waiting one more day would have broken him, as if my pain had an expiration date. I didn't respond. That night, I slept in my father's old sweater, the one I'd brought home without realizing it, his scent faint but still there. I clutched it like a lifeline. Every memory felt too loud. Every thought circled back to that hallway. The next morning, my sister arrived, without warning. She took one look at me and wrapped me in a hug so tight it made me gasp. "He served you papers at the funeral?" she said when I told her. I nodded. Her jaw tightened. That man has no idea what he just did. I laughed weakly. I don't think he cares. Oh, he will, she said. At the lawyer's office later that week, the details began to settle in. The papers weren't new. They were prepared weeks ago, signed, ready. This wasn't a decision made in grief or anger. It was planned. I sat there, nodding, listening, while something cold and steady replaced the chaos inside me. If he thought he had chosen the moment of maximum control, he was wrong. He had chosen the moment I had nothing left to lose, and that changes a person. Grief is supposed to make you weak. That's what everyone assumes. That you'll cry too much, sleep too little, forget where you put things, that you'll be fragile, pliable, grateful for any kindness extended your way. What no one talks about is the other thing grief does. It strips you. In the weeks after the funeral, I moved through the days like a ghost, learning the shape of her old house. I sorted my father's belongings slowly, deliberately, touching each item like it might speak if I gave it enough time. His watch, his tools, notes, and his handwriting tucked into drawers, evidence of a life that had been solid, intentional. He never ran from hard things. That thought stayed with me. My husband, soon to be ex, I supposed, texted occasionally, always neutral, almost polite, as if we were negotiating a lease instead of dismantling a marriage. "I'll need you to send financial documents. We should discuss the house. My lawyer recommends." I read the messages without responding right away. I let them sit. I let him feel the waiting he had denied me. One afternoon, while going through old files, I found something unexpected, a folder labeled with my father's name. Inside were documents I hadn't seen before, insurance policies, deeds, a handwritten note folded carefully at the bottom. "For you, in case I'm not there to explain." My hands shook as I unfolded it. He'd written about planning, about wanting to make sure I was safe no matter what life took from me. He'd left things in my name, quietly, intentionally, not extravagant, but solid. I sat on the floor and cried again, this time with a strange sense of relief mixed in. My father had known, not about the divorce, but about life, about how quickly stability can vanish. I laughed softly through tears. "You always did think ahead." That night, my husband called. I almost didn't answer. "We need to talk," he said. "Yes," I replied, "we do." We met at the house we once shared. He stood in the doorway like a visitor, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the room as if it no longer belonged to him. "I didn't expect this to take so long," he said. I looked at him calmly. "You didn't expect me to stop cushioning the fall." He frowned. "That's not fair." I gestured around us. "You served me papers at my father's funeral, left the room long before I did." He shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't think you'd react like this." That sentence unlocked something sharp and clear inside me. "You thought I'd collapse. You thought grief would make me compliant." He didn't deny it. I laughed then, low and incredulous. "You always picked the wrong moment." He tried to regain footing, talked about needing closure, about wanting a clean break, about how we'd grown apart. "You left before you left. You just waited for me to be vulnerable enough not to fight." Silence filled the space. I handed him a folder of my own, copies, documents, proof of what my father had left me, what I owned independently, what wasn't his to divide. His face changed. "This wasn't in our original calculations," he said. "No, because you never counted on my father still protecting me." That night, after he left, I walked through the house slowly. I touched the walls, the counters, the spaces where memories still lived. I wasn't sentimental. I wasn't desperate to keep things that no longer fit. I was assessing. Grief had burned away my fear. What remained was resolve. I began making choices without explaining them. I changed passwords. I opened new accounts. I let my lawyer speak where words might fail me. People around me whispered. Some said I was being cold. Others said I was strong. I didn't care. Labels felt irrelevant. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to survive with my dignity intact. Late one evening, I sat on the porch wrapped in my father's sweater, watching the sky darken. I thought about how love is supposed to show up when things are hard, how some people mistake proximity for loyalty. My husband had chosen his moment carefully, but he'd underestimated one thing. Grief doesn't always break you. Sometimes it forges you into something sharper than anyone expects. He underestimated how quickly word travels in a small circle. He also underestimated grief's twin, memory. People remembered my father. They remembered how he showed up for others. They remembered how he treated me. And when they learned what my husband had done, the silence around him grew loud. It wasn't dramatic, no confrontations, no public scenes, just doors closing gently. At first, he didn't notice. He went about his life as planned, confident in the narrative he'd rehearsed. Irreconcilable differences, growing apart, a difficult but necessary decision. Clean language meant to smooth rough edges. But then, invitations stopped coming. A mutual friend canceled dinner. His sister stopped returning calls. At work, conversations cooled. Sympathy that had once been directed at both of us shifted decisively. He called me one afternoon, frustration sharp in his voice. "People are acting strange," he said. "They won't say it outright, but I can tell." I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, then brought it back. "What do you think they know?" "That you're upset," he said. "That you're telling a different story." "I'm not telling anything. I'm just not lying." Silence. "You don't need to make me the villain," he said, finally. I laughed, low and incredulous. "You walked into that role alone." The legal process dragged on, not because I delayed out of spite, but because I refused to rush clarity. He pushed for quick resolutions. I asked questions. He wanted efficiency. I wanted accuracy. Every meeting revealed how much he'd assumed I wouldn't challenge. "You're being difficult," he snapped during one conversation. "I'm being thorough," I corrected. "There's a difference." The house became a point of tension. He wanted it sold quickly, clean break, move on. I wanted time, not because I was attached to the walls, but because I understood leverage now. My lawyers smiled the first time I said that word out loud. Leverage. Meanwhile, my father's absence settled in deeper ways. I'd reach for my phone to call him. Then, remember, the grief came in quieter waves now, not as sharp, but heavier. It followed me into ordinary moments, grocery aisles, morning coffee, passing comments that reminded me of his voice. One evening, my husband stopped by unexpectedly. He looked worn, less sure. "I didn't expect this to be so isolating," he admitted. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You chose isolation when you chose cruelty. That wasn't my intention." "Impact matters more than intention," I said, my father's words coming back to me when I needed them most. He ran a hand through his hair. "I thought people would understand." "They do, they just don't agree." That's when I saw it, the crack in his confidence, the realization that timing isn't neutral, that how you leave matters just as much as why. I lost my dad, and then I lost my marriage in the same breath. People don't forget that. He sat down heavily at the table. "I didn't think—" "No," I interrupted gently. "You didn't." He looked up at me then, eyes damp. "Do you hate me?" I considered the question, truly considered it. "No, I don't hate you, but I no longer protect you." That landed harder than anger ever could. He left shortly after, shoulders slumped, his certainty unraveling piece by piece. I watched him go without guilt. In the weeks that followed, things shifted further. His lawyer softened. Proposals became more reasonable. Deadlines stretched. Compromises appeared where ultimatums once stood. Grief had stripped me bare, but it had also stripped him of the advantage he thought he had. I spent more time with my mother. We cooked together. We sat quietly. Sometimes we talked about my father, sometimes we didn't. One evening, she looked at me across the table and said, "He would be proud of you." That sentence undid me. I cried into my hands, the sound raw and unfiltered, grief and gratitude colliding. She held me the way she always had. Later that night, alone, I stood in the living room and laughed softly through tears. "Dad, you always knew how to leave me stronger than you found me." My husband chose a moment he thought would make me weak. Instead, it reminded everyone, including me, exactly who I was raised by. And the consequences of that were only beginning. By the time spring arrived, the divorce no longer felt like an emergency. It felt like a process. That shift mattered more than I expected. Emergencies demand reaction. processes demand intention. I moved through mine deliberately, no longer chasing closure, no longer rushing toward an ending just to escape the discomfort of the middle. My husband grew restless. He called more often now, not to argue, to check in, to ask questions that felt less like logistics and more like fishing lines cast into uncertain water. "Are you seeing someone?" he asked one evening. I laughed before I could stop myself. The sound startled us both. "No," I said, "I'm seeing myself." He didn't know what to do with that. He had expected me to unravel, to spiral, to lean on him even as he exited. Instead, I was steady. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. At one mediation meeting, his lawyer suggested a compromise that would have benefited him significantly. I listened, nodded, and then slid a document across the table. It outlined what my father had arranged years ago: assets that were not shared, protections quietly put in place. The room went still. "That changes the conversation," his lawyer said carefully. "Yes," I replied, "it does." My husband stared at the paper like it had personally betrayed him. "You never told me about this." "I didn't know I needed to," I said. Afterward, in the hallway, he confronted me. "You could have mentioned it." "You could have waited a week," I replied calmly. He flinched. The house was settled next, not sold, not rushed, bought out on my terms. I kept it, not because I needed the walls, but because I needed the choice. The moment the paperwork was finalized, I sat on the living room floor and let myself cry. Not from sadness, from release. The sobs came hard and fast, then fainted into quiet laughter. I really did it. Friends rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. Dinners, texts, invitations, support that didn't ask me to explain myself. People who had been polite before became protective now, not because I needed saving, but because they recognized injustice when they saw it. One afternoon, a mutual friend told me something without meaning to. He said he thought you'd be too broken to fight. The words didn't hurt the way they might have earlier. They clarified. Later that week, my husband asked to meet one last time, not to negotiate, to talk. We sat across from each other in the same cafe where we'd once planned vacations and debated paint colors. "I didn't expect this outcome," he admitted. "I know," I said. "Timing would soften things." I laughed, not unkindly. "Timing reveals things. It doesn't soften them." He looked at me for a long moment. "Do you think there was ever a version of this that ended differently?" I considered the question, thought about the hall date, the folder, the day my father was buried. "Yes," I said, "if you'd chosen decency." He nodded slowly. "I didn't." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." That was the first time he said he was sorry without asking for anything in return. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. "You're different." "So are you. You just didn't expect me to be the one who grew." After he left, I stayed a while longer, watching people pass by the window, life moving, unbothered, waiting for no one. At home that night, I went through my father's things again. This time, it felt less like mourning and more like inheritance, not objects, principles, boundaries, strength. I slept deeply for the first time in months. The next chapter of my life didn't arrive with fanfare. It came quietly, in mornings where I didn't dread my phone, in evenings where silence felt earned instead of lonely. My husband had thought the funeral would be my weakest moment. He had been wrong. It had been the moment I stopped bending. After the papers were signed, the world didn't change overnight. There was no dramatic shift in the air, no sudden sense of triumph. Life simply continued. And that, more than anything, told me how much I had survived. The house felt different once it was truly mine, not reclaimed, claimed. I moved furniture without asking anyone's opinion. I painted a wall the color I'd always loved, but had been told was too much. The smell of fresh paint filled the room, sharp and clean, and I laughed out loud standing in the middle of it. Imagine that, taking up space and not apologizing for it. Grief still visited. It always will. Some mornings I woke up reaching for my phone, my fingers already dialing my father's number before memory caught up. Those moments hit hardest, quiet, sudden. I'd sit on the edge of the bed and let the tears come, not fighting them, not hurrying them away. I started walking every evening. No destination, just movement. The rhythm of my steps grounded me. Neighbors waved. Some stopped to talk. People asked how I was doing, and for the first time, I answered honestly. "I'm learning," I said. The divorce changed how people treated me, some with curiosity, some with respect, some with thinly veiled judgment. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. I let silence do the work it had always done best. One afternoon, my ex-husband showed up unexpectedly. He stood on the porch, hands clasped together, looking unsure. "I won't stay long," he said. I nodded. "Okay." He looked past me into the house. "It feels different." "It is," I replied. He shifted. "I wanted to tell you things haven't been easy." I raised an eyebrow slightly, not mocking, just observant. "I lost friends," he continued. "Opportunities, too. People don't look at me the same way." I waited. "I didn't realize how much your father meant to people," he said quietly. I laughed softly. "He meant everything to me." He nodded, swallowing. "I see that now." Seeing it now doesn't change what you did, but it explains why it mattered. He looked at me then with something like regret stripped of entitlement. "I didn't think you'd come out of this stronger." I met his gaze. "That's because you mistook kindness for weakness." He left after that. No apologies, no promises, just the acknowledgement of consequence. That night, I sat on the floor surrounded by old photo albums. I flipped through pages slowly, my father holding me on his shoulders, my wedding day, a life that had unfolded in chapters, some ending too soon, others ending exactly when they needed to. I cried again, the sound low and full, grief and gratitude tangled together. I laughed through it too, because the human heart is strange like that, capable of holding so much at once. I began planning things just for myself, a trip I'd postponed for years, a class I'd always wanted to take. I stopped waiting for permission to want things. One evening, my sister called. "He would have been so proud," she said, voice thick. "I know," I replied, and for once, saying it didn't hurt. I realized then that the divorce hadn't been the ending of my marriage. That had ended long before. The funeral simply exposed it. What remained after the noise was something quieter, steadier, a sense of self I hadn't fully inhabited before. My ex-husband had thought serving me papers that day would give him control. Instead, it stripped him of it. All that was left now was the final chapter, and I was ready to write it on my own terms. Closure didn't arrive the way people describe it. There was no final conversation that wrapped everything in a neat bow, no apology that suddenly made the past lighter, no moment where I felt finished with grief, finished with anger, finished with the ache of what should have been. Closure came in pieces. It came the first morning I woke up and didn't think of my ex-husband until halfway through my coffee. I noticed it only because it felt unusual. The realization made me smile, small and surprised, like finding money in a coat pocket you'd forgotten about. It came the day I donated my father's old coats, standing in the thrift store parking lot with tears running down my face, laughing softly at myself. "You always hated clutter, Dad. Even now, you're making me let go." It came when I stopped rehearsing arguments in my head, when I no longer imagined what I would say if I ran into my ex unexpectedly. The need to explain myself had evaporated. I saw him one last time at a community event months later. He was thinner, quieter. The confidence that once preceded him had dulled into something more cautious. When our eyes met, he hesitated, then nodded. I nodded back. That was it. No surge of emotion, no spike of anger, just recognition. Two people who had once shared a life, now sharing nothing but a memory. On the drive home, I laughed out loud, the sound filling the car. So this is what peace feels like. Not loud, not dramatic, just mine. I spent more time with my mother. We talked about my father in present tense sometimes, as if he might still walk through the door. Other times we sat in silence, letting the absence sit between us without trying to fix it. One afternoon she said, "You know, he worried about you." "I know," I said. "He trusted you," she added, "to handle whatever came." That trust settled into me like something warm. I began telling my story differently, not with bitterness, not with defensiveness, just truth. When people asked what happened, I said, my marriage ended and my father died. It was a hard year, and that was enough. The house continued to change. I planted flowers in the yard. I replaced furniture that carried too much weight. I kept what felt right, let go of what didn't. Each choice felt symbolic without being handiworked. I found my father's handwriting again one evening, this time in an old notebook I hadn't noticed before. Just a line scribbled in the margin. Stand up straight, even when it hurts. I sat on the floor and cried until my chest ached. Then I laughed, shaking my head. Always the teacher. The divorce didn't make me stronger overnight. It revealed the strength that had been there all along, waiting for me to stop apologizing for it. My ex-husband had thought the funeral would break me. Instead, it reminded me who I came from. I didn't forgive him in some grand cinematic way. I didn't need to. Forgiveness implies a debt. What I felt instead was release, the understanding that his choices no longer defined my story. I closed that chapter without slamming the door, just a quiet click. And when I looked ahead at the life waiting beyond grief and betrayal, I didn't feel fear. I felt ready. A year passed. I didn't mark the date. I only noticed because one morning I woke up and realized my life no longer revolved around what had been taken from me. It revolved around what I was building. The house felt settled now, not just furnished, but lived in. My laugh echoed differently in it, freely. I hosted dinners without checking if the seating looked right. I left dishes in the sink overnight and didn't feel judged by the silence. The space had stopped remembering him. One afternoon, while sorting mail, I saw his handwriting on an envelope. I stood there for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a single page, no legal headerhead, no formal tone, just words. He wrote about regret, about how he hadn't understood the damage he caused until it followed him everywhere. Jobs that never quite worked out, friendships that faded without explanation, relationships that ended before they began, women who listened politely and then slowly backed away when they learned the story. He wrote, "I thought serving you papers that day would give me control. Instead, it became the thing people remember me for." I sat at the table and let the paper rest in my hands. He wrote that he finally understood why my father mattered, why timing mattered, why kindness, once broken, doesn't grow back the same way. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked if I was okay. That was the mistake that followed him. Because I was. I laughed softly as I folded the letter. Imagine that, asking me that now. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, out of completeness. Later that week, I visited my father's grave alone. I brought no flowers, just myself. I sat on the grass and talked out loud, telling him about the house, about the garden, about how I'd finally taken that trip he always encouraged. I cried, quietly, steadily, the kind of crying that cleans instead of consumes. Then I laughed, wiping my face with the back of my hand. You'd love this, Dad. You were right about everything. As I stood to leave, I felt it clearly. The truth people rarely talk about. Some endings don't hurt because they end. They hurt because they reveal. My husband's greatest mistake wasn't serving me divorce papers at my father's funeral. It was believing that grief would make me small. It didn't.
It made me exact. It made me honest. It made me unmovable. I drove home with the windows down, sunlight spilling across the dashboard. My life stretched ahead of me, not perfect, not painless, but undeniably mine. That was the consequence he never calculated, and the inheritance my father left me that mattered most.